Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unleashed with me, Scarlett Johnson, presented by Moms for Liberty. And today we're going to discuss America's birth rate crisis, foreign surrogacy, and the future of the family with a special guest, Emma Waters. Emma Waters is a policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation's Center for Technology and the Human Person, where she focuses on family, biotechnology, and reproductive medicine. She is a wife, a mother of two, and author of an upcoming book, Lead Like Gel. Emma brings a thoughtful, faith-rooted perspective to some of the biggest issues facing the country right now. Hi, everyone, and I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Emma Waters. Hi, Emma. It's so great to have you on.
Hi, Scarlett. It's so good to be with you too.
And you work with the Heritage Foundation. What is your role?
So I am a policy analyst in the Center for Technology and the Human Person, which is a fancy way of saying that I deal with any federal policies and cultural issues as it relates to technology and human conception and development. So that includes everything from AI to genetics to the way that we approach education when it comes to technology today.
These are really important concepts right now, because I think just a few years ago, this wasn't on my radar at all. AI, I didn't understand it very well, and I certainly didn't think that in just a few years it would have such a prominent role in K through 12 education. And so I think the technology is just speeding up so fast. And a big concern of the moms at Moms for Liberty, the parents, moms and dads and grandparents, is the injection of technology into the lives of our children. And I mean, kids are in front of screens younger and younger. You're seeing toddlers holding screens now. And add to that there are those that are saying we should have AI take a more prominent role in our kids' classrooms. And even some saying that they could be a one-on-one tutor and could really be helpful addressing the literacy crisis that we have in America. What are your thoughts on that?
Parents are torn between two compelling interests right now. The first is that they want their children to be educated and equipped for a world that will increasingly be utilizing AI. And so many parents will say, well, we need to have AI in our schools because we want them to be prepared when they graduate and go into the job market. And that's a very understandable concern. The question, however, is how we're going to implement and teach AI to our students, especially those younger years. And it brings up two really important areas of concern. The first is that right now, AI tools are by and large mediated by screens, whether that's on a tablet or a school computer. And what have we seen for years of research now? It's that when young children from preschool onwards are primarily learning through a tablet or a Google Chrome computer, if you will, their ability to retain information, to focus for a long period of time, and to develop mentally and socially is drastically impacted for the worst. They're actually less able to engage in the information, remember what they're learning, and far more likely to be distracted and sort of jumping between a bunch of different quick video clips without any sustained ability to really critically think and engage with the material. A study that came out recently even showed that for children who were on screens for just a few hours a day, their gray matter, this part of your brain that's essential for memory and for development, drastically decreased with time. But children who weren't on screens actually had far better outcomes in their overall mental and psychological development, their ability to learn. So if we're talking about AI and we're talking about giving children at very young ages access to this technology through screens, I think we already have a lot of data that tells us this is going to be really problematic. And then there's the other side of the question, which is that AI is not a sentient being. AI is not a person. Even if you had a robot that looks like a person that was fueled by AI teaching your child, ultimately AI is only responsible for the transmission of information, of knowledge, strictly speaking. But what can AI not do that is so crucial for that teacher-child relationship? Well, it's that relational aspect where they're not simply giving your child information, but in the best case scenarios, they're passing along wisdom and critical thinking skills and common sense And this ability not only to know what is right or what is true, but also know how to apply it in a way that is good for yourself and good for other people. It's this embodied experience that I think is so crucial to good education that with AI is just completely lost. And so it's not that AI tools can't be implemented over time and in appropriate ways to aid in learning, but if we allow AI to just replace our educational experience altogether, I think we're going to find that the long-term impact is actually quite different than what we want it to be.
And so I just posted yesterday about an article in the New York Times that was discussing screens in a very prominent New York kindergarten. And the journalists interviewed parents who said that they, right away, before enrolling their kids, they had a question about how much screen time will there be in schools, because that was very important to them. They had spent the first 5 years of their child's life reducing the amount of time that their exposure to screens. So they had been very thoughtful about that. And they were told that the kids would only be on for 15 minutes a day, just as a relaxation. It would only be learning apps. It would be, they'd be safe. And then 3 months later, the parents find out that their kids have been on screens for hours every day, used as a babysitting tool, used to keep kids quiet. They're watching Taylor Swift videos, YouTube. And so they were very upset because they felt that all of their work that they had put into their child and all of those probably tearful moments where their kid wants to have a screen and they say no, all of that was sort of ruined in 3 months in the classroom. And it kind of begs the question, how much screen time do our kids have in school? And if the staff can't control that now, how are they going to control it when they unveil AI into the classroom?
This is absolutely right. And this is part of, I think, the founding mission of Moms for Liberty, which is that what do you do when the agreement you have with your public school system, with your teachers, even in private school systems, is completely lost, and that trust is completely lost because of the actions of those teachers not upholding the agreement they have with parents? That in and of itself, I think, is a massive problem, because then it broaches the second question, which is when you're giving children effectively unlimited access to the internet, even with the basic protections that schools have, parents have no idea what children are being exposed to online and at school. And frankly, teachers have no idea what kids are being exposed to. We know that kids are better than anyone else at getting around parental controls. They're good at hiding what they're doing, and they're good at quickly switching tabs or switching apps so that teachers have no real idea what's actually taking place on those programs. And what is one of the biggest concerns that we rightly have when it comes to AI and digital technology? It's the exposure to sexually explicit material. Pornography first look rates are going down to age 8 on average for many children. You have the exposure to very violent content that's actually really desensitizing us to the world around us, where we're actually more numb and less able to engage in a very vulnerable sense, because we've seen way too much of this harsh and totally age inappropriate material. Or just the bigger question of, is it really ideal for your kid to watch Taylor Swift videos for multiple hours a day or at all?
School day where they should be learning, that's inappropriate. Maybe if that's your choice, you want her to watch some Taylor Swift videos, fine. But in the middle of the school day, that's learning time, and it shouldn't be a babysitter. You shouldn't at school. It shouldn't be a babysitter, period. But especially at school, shouldn't give kids an iPad just to keep them all quiet, and that's primarily, listen, with young kids, it's a real temptation. I have 5 kids. It's a temptation to keep them quiet, and every once in a while, you turn on a show. But a parent like me and parent like you, parents in Moms for Liberty, we're really thoughtful about the shows that we present to our children, particularly young children, and the books. And when it's really disheartening that there's a possibility you could put them in the classroom and then they're exposed to a lot of things that you have been really trying to prevent them from seeing, because you want them to enjoy their childhood and be innocent as long as possible. And I think these screens can rob kids of their innocence.
Well, and the other thing it robs them of is a good development of delayed gratification. So these technologies, this largely unfettered access to the technologies, is actually trained to touch our reward system in our brain and
Mm.
train us to desire and pursue instant gratification over the very difficult and laborious experience of delayed gratification. Well, what is at the heart of good education? It's delayed gratification.
Mhm.
It's seeing a problem. It's learning how to read, to examine, to study, to think about a problem 6 different ways and really wrestle with the information so that you can then figure out the problem or the solution or overcome it. And it's incredibly mentally taxing, like to think hard and think deeply and work through material, especially material that's harder to read, requires a lot of us, but it is essential for our development as people, our development educationally. And there's so much reward that comes from it. I mean, I think everyone has had an experience where they've had this difficult task before them and they've put their whole brain and energy behind it. And it may have taken way longer than they wanted it to and been very exhausting in the process. But the moment they figure out the solution, they get the book chapter written just right, they solve the math equation, there's this rush of endorphins that shoot through your body where you're like, yes, I just did this thing. And it comes with so much satisfaction in a very positive way and agency and self-esteem. And all of that is being robbed when we replace good education with mere screen time and screens as babysitting tools. We're actually undermining our kids' ability to develop those skills. And I think that's just it's a really sad thing to deprive your child of, especially if it's just as a way to sort of entertain them in between different class periods or when kids are getting too rowdy, or pretending that somehow your like education learning app is actually like passing that sort of like deep learning on to your kids.
Yes, two questions, because those apps, there's a difference between passive reading and deep reading. And I was just reading about that because I'm really interested in what's happening, and we are unveiling our AI toolkit. And I'm now that it's like, now that I see it, I can't unsee it. My kids are, I don't have young kids anymore. My youngest is 13, but I've talked to a lot of parents with younger children, and they have fears that I did not have when my kids were young, and that is, will my kids learn to read? Will they learn through the phonetic method, the best possible method? And how much exposure to technology are they going to have in the classroom, and is that going to harm them? So I think that you need to look at someone as they're talking. When a child does, that's how they develop, that the muscles and the muscle memory. And I think when you rob the kids of that, that's going to have a detrimental effect.
Oh, this is so spot on. I mean, think about the impact of just teachers wearing masks in the classroom for a child's ability to develop those learning skills. My daughter, she's 3 years old, and we've been doing a little bit of speech therapy with her to help with some pronunciation tools. And that's the first thing our speech therapist said, which was to draw her eyes up to our mouth and have her watch us say the words and see the way that our lips and our facial structure is moving. And that has made the world of difference when it comes to helping her overcome some very small speech impediments. And you're exactly right that if you're just looking at a frog on a screen that's saying you're actually depriving a child of all of those interpersonal embodied learning tools that they actually need to develop the proper pronunciation and understanding of the word. And yeah, I think it's a fantastic point. Like a frog on a screen or even a robot cartoon is never going to be able to do it to the same level of excellence and really sufficient education standards that our children need and that they really deserve.
And a big issue is kids not looking adults or each other in the eye when they're talking, looking at their face. And I think that's because they look at screens and they don't look up. And that's a social skill. That's a soft skill, looking at each other and then reading the face and reading the expressions and learning that maybe what is being said is different than what is being projected on the face, and all of these really complicated things that make us human.
No, it's exactly right. And I'm sure most people have heard of the studies, and you'll hear this in any sort of counseling. If you go for marriage counseling or relationship counseling, that the majority of our communication isn't in the words that we say, but it's in our body language, it's our facial expressions, it's the tone of our voice. And then words make up about less than 10% of our communication. Even more interesting, they'll actually say that people don't necessarily process every word you say, but they process the impact of what you say based on
Mm.
all of those different factors playing together. And again, applying this to the way we think about screen-based learning or even AI-based learning, you are completely stripping communication of the majority of its power because you don't have the embodied body expressions. You don't have a nuanced tone of voice that's accounting for different inflections and different emotional impacts as they're communicating it. You don't have a face that you're interacting with. It's either just an audio or it's a cartoon, and it's just the words themselves. But words themselves have never been the primary communication tool or the communication impact, if you will. And so, what will it look like to have an entire generation of children raised primarily on a cartoon or learning or educational experience? I think you're already starting to see the shifts in their understanding of material. To your point, their ability to engage with other humans. They're not looking in their eyes, or they're looking off to the side instead of looking directly at you when they're communicating. And that goes a long way, even in their self-confidence and their ability to feel like they can go out in front of other people. And this was, I think, I think there's an essay in the Washington Post this past week with a social scientist at Stanford who was talking about the decline in dating culture and how he was finding that even at these elite Ivy League institutions who should have every skill and resource in their arsenal to be the best, most successful person they can be, couldn't even ask someone out for coffee. Sending a text, even, which is like the most basic and easy way to do anything in life, was too much because they had just been trained, one, towards career, but two, away from that interpersonal relationship where you're taking a risk and putting yourself out there and engaging with that person directly. I think the downstream effects of this are going to be so detrimental, not just for our educational outcomes, but even for things like dating and marriage and relationships and our ability to really vulnerably connect with one another.
I mean, listen, you can see teenagers all together, a big group, and everyone's like this, looking at the phone. And they're texting each other rather than talking to each other or snapping each other. And I think that's why more and more parents, including myself, they're becoming a lot more strict about screen time. And they don't care. The kids aren't gonna like it. That's too bad. My job isn't to be your friend. But I know I and so many other parents are phones away. Dinner time, phones away. No one has a phone. That there's family time with no phones. They're going to shut the phone off either remotely or take it away at night. And this is something that's much needed. And I think because the research is coming out showing that it's just showing what is common sense, what anyone with kids that are school age can already see, that these devices and the addiction to screens is hurting them in many ways. And even if it was gangbusters in school, let's say they're getting all A's, it's working socially, it's robbing them of so many necessary skills. And we got to get our kids back to human interaction and a lot less time on these apps.
Yeah, and it's not something that parents can do on their own. Parents are absolutely empowered persons who have the moral and parental responsibility to care for their children, something Moms for Liberty does better than almost anyone else, but it can't be a solo endeavor because ultimately parents are not with their kids 24/7. Even if you homeschool, you're going to have multiple children you're taking care of, and there's always the question of what happens when they're out of your sight or even when you're just focused on something else in the room. And this is why I'm encouraged in a lot of ways to see projects like Melania Trump's really start to ask these questions and think about how can we orient everything from the federal government, state government, our education system, and even the expectations we have in society as a whole toward protecting and really stewarding our children away from just this distraction or limitation of screens. So my friend Claire Morrell, who published the book, The Tech Exit, talks a lot about the community buy-in that's essential for this sort of tech-free existence, that you actually need to intentionally find other families who are willing to make the same commitments, because no parent wants to have a screen-free child just to have their child sit alone in the corner while all the friends are texting.
Yes.
Like, that's a horrible experience for everyone. The child feels lonely, the parents feel bad, and they're not actually then making friends who share those values and are pursuing similar things. And so it really has to be a project that, as parents, as communities, as schools, and even as the government, we really all take on together, because it's going to require all hands on deck to make this a reality.
And we see a lot of states like mine in Wisconsin passing legislation that bans cell phone use in classrooms. And that's very helpful for school districts who, if they try and implement these policies on their own, they even get a lot of pushback from parents. So when it's a statewide legislation, it's statutory recommendation or law, then it's a lot easier for these districts to implement them locally. And there's different ways. Sometimes they say you just can't have them in the classroom, but you can have them in passing period, or they could say, nope, you have to keep it in the locker and it doesn't come out until the end of school. But I do think that the removal of these cell phone devices is a first step forward. However, when there are Chromebooks and when there are, you can do all of that, but if the kids are on their Apple iPads or their Apple MacBooks or the Chromebooks, they know how to use those and perform all of the same functions as they would on their phone. I know, because sometimes they are texting me from them and I'm like, why are you texting me? Are they letting you use your phone? No, they were texting me from their MacBook or their Chromebook. And I'm like, I thought you couldn't do that, but I guess you can.
You can do anything you want. Yeah, and this is why so many schools now are starting to actually reverse course, who spent millions of dollars supplying every student with a Google Chromebook, and are now rethinking it altogether and actually removing Chromebooks out of the classroom. And it's just a few school districts now, but I think you're going to see more and more schools start to reverse course on that initial goal, because they've seen that over time scores haven't improved, learning metrics haven't improved, and they've just introduced a host of all new problems, whether it's texting parents or accessing content they shouldn't on their Google Chrome computers, or simply just having more distracted children who are less able to listen and engage with a teacher because they're sort of just zoning out to the instant gratification a screen provides. And that's a really positive trend that I hope we start to see more schools take initiative on.
And at the same time, and as the AI Commission, as we've heard, our American children do need to know how to use computers. This is the world that we live in. So we do have to introduce these. These are important. They're going to need to know how to use a computer and access AI. They're going to need to know how to navigate all of this in order to succeed. But we just have to put in the guardrails. And like you said, we need the community buy-in. I think that's a really good point. So that that teachers, they are trained and they're equipped, administrators and parents are all working together as a team in order to educate and protect children. And I think if we do this as teamwork, then we can be successful.
Well, and as Americans, we have this all or nothing mindset, which in some ways has led to the American greatness that we know and love. But in other ways, means that we're not thinking with the right nuance when it comes to the implementation of certain technologies. So think Silicon Valley elites at Microsoft, Dell, and beyond. They don't let their children have a computer until they're in 8th grade, because they know more than anyone else that you do need to be equipped to use these incredible technologies. But if we're being honest, does your first grader need to be adept on a MacBook? Not in the slightest. That's not a skill that they need at that age. And so I think something that I'd really love to see in this conversation is a proper understanding of when to implement and equip students with different technologies, whether that's the use of computers or AI chatbots. And I think there are a couple of things here. The first is that you actually want your child to gain proficiency in those core skills before you introduce a tool, because a tool like a computer or AI can quickly replace the active learning altogether. And so instead of assisting you in research, it's just doing the research for you. And so what you want is you want to ensure kids are learning how to read well, they're learning how to critically think, they're even learning how to research effectively through middle school and high school before you're simply giving them free access to tools that promise to do it all for them. So instead of actually thinking about what they're reading and really learning how to research deep and compare sources and piece together a narrative, they're just typing into ChatGPT and saying, write me a research paper that does this. And so they've technically fulfilled the assignment that was required of them, but they have barely learned anything in the process. So a really good analogy for this, I think, is how we think about driver's licenses in America. So there's no world in which a good parent would give their toddler or their fifth grader the keys to the car and say, good luck, you've basically got this. And yet at the same time, you're going to have your child in your car with you. As they get older, you're going to start pointing out road signs and say, okay, well, this stop sign means you stop here. This yellow sign with the squiggly lines means the road is merging together. And over time, they see you drive and follow the rules, and they're learning even just by observation. When they're 15, you give them the learner's license and you're training them how to drive, but you're never letting them out of your sight with the car and the keys together until they're 16 or older, and they're actually equipped to drive well and drive responsibly. They both understand it, but they've seen it modeled for them for long enough that they are well equipped to be good and safe drivers on the road, both for themselves and all the other passengers out there. And I think if we have a similar mindset with computers, with AI, I think we'll really be set for success. So my children are still very, very young, so I have no real parental wisdom to offer here, but it's something that we've really wrestled with, of how do we teach them to use these technologies only as a tool and implement them in a way that's actually useful for them and not just hurting their ability to develop these skills themselves. And I think AI, even more than computers, really poses a massive risk here, something that I'm frankly really concerned about. Of, will my kids learn to research well, or is research even going to look radically different by the time they're in high school and college, such that they're not cutting their teeth on the same difficult questions and assignments that even me and my husband had to going through college?
Yes. And we're talking about education, but there's even not being properly educated. That's a problem. But there was recently a trial in California where against some of these big AI companies, where parents were talking about their children having relationships with AI such that they either attempted to take their own life, or they were very unfortunately successful in taking their own life because AI was so real to them that they treated like a person, and that AI convinced them to take their life. And this is so shocking to me because, you know, I'm old in comparison to my kids, and I'm just learning how to use AI, where some of these kids are very skilled. They've been using it longer than a lot of us adults, and things were happening that parents were just completely unaware of.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking because you're seeing these non-sentient chatbots that are just trained on language patterns intentionally try to form an emotional bond with the user. I mean, that's incredibly strange. I am very grateful for much of the technology, but my computer doesn't try to form an emotional bond with me. There's still a very clear line between me as a human person and this as a tool, as a technology that AI chatbots are completely defying. And so think about using Claude, and you say, Claude, I'm having a problem with this. And the first response isn't just, here's the information you need to know. The first response is to relate to you as a person, machine to person. And it says, for example, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. You were totally validated in that experience. It must be really hard for you. I'm glad that you came to me. Let's figure this out together. That's not just a tool that you're engaging with. That is an incredibly powerful powerful attempt to be human to human, relationally connect with you in a way that seems very inappropriate for a proper human to machine relationship. But it's because of that very programming that, one, it creates active users, because who doesn't love to be validated, and who doesn't love to feel like they are understood and seen? It's the most natural of human desires, but it's the most natural of human desires that should be fulfilled by another human, not a tool. But it creates these repeat users who are coming and using the technology again and again. And then, as you're saying, in many cases turns into these really heartbreaking scenarios where persons, their best friend is an AI chatbot. They have a romantic relationship with an AI chatbot that they, in some cases, have even filed for divorce from their actual married partner. Yeah. Because they have they feel more loved and validated by this tool, this thing that doesn't actually exist in the way that they think. Or others where, yeah, it pushes them towards deeply, deeply troubling behavior. And part of it is because it's a tool, it's playing off of what you say. And we know that within the human heart, there is good and there is depravity. And this is the human experience, the wrestling between the two. And in many cases, I think the darkness and the pain of the human experience is actually what's coming out, and then is training these chatbots to respond with similarly dark content and recommendations that if you're talking to another person, the other person could maybe say, wow, like, that's heavy, that's dark, but let me remind you, like, let's like keep the right perspective here. Let me draw you out of that place in a way that this sort of algorithmic responsive AI doesn't always do, which is why you have instances where even the founders of these technologies say, wow, we never trained AI to encourage suicide. That's never something we had in mind, and yet it is encouraging suicide. Or you have cases, last example here, where this man was using AI to brainstorm different mathematical equations to try to solve a problem. And he had tens of thousands of messages, and he continued developing this idea, and the chatbot continued responding saying, wow, that's the greatest idea I've ever heard. No one's proposed an idea like that before. And it seems funny to think about it, but this man became so convinced that he had actually discovered a mathematical principle that no one else had, and started making massive life decisions, potentially changing his job or investing financially. There was a massive loss there, over something that wasn't actually real at all. Like, it wasn't a real mathematical equation. It wasn't new, but this chatbot so convinced him that it was. He changed his whole life around it. I mean, that's incredibly, incredibly harmful. And again, we cannot just approach these technologies assuming that's a net positive if we're not taking into account these very real abuses that are playing out in real people's lives. And ultimately, you can't hold a chatbot responsible, right? You can't take your chatbot to court and say, you harmed me and you owe me. You can sue the companies, and we're thinking through the legal metrics of that. But at the same time, there's no real way to hold that entity accountable for the harm that they've done. You, the person, are the one who bear all the pain and the burden of that at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, already there are cases where there are people trying to use their chatbot as their lawyer, and it's going to represent them in court. And and there's already talk, like the American Bar Association trying to put in language to say you cannot have an AI robot lawyer. And it's just crazy. It's crazy, the things. And I've read that there are particularly men that get this ongoing sort of phenomenon where men get depressed every time there is an open AI update, because their chatbot resets and they're sad because they miss their old chatbot.
That's so wild, but it speaks to how lonely we are, the loneliness epidemic, that we feel such strong emotional bonds with a tool, in part because we're lacking that emotional vulnerability and closeness in the lives outside of that, or in our lives outside of that. Like, the number of men who are struggling in the dating market or struggling in jobs they don't feel like are going anywhere, and then who are turning to these sort of chatbots to fill the void. I think, it's emblematic of so many other problems in our society. And is an understandable way that people are trying to cope, but ultimately points to just how deep the pain is, and how lost so many people feel in America right now.
Is some of that detachment, because you study the fertility rate, that's an area of expertise for you and you've written extensively about it. Is some of this isolation, this lack of ability to communicate, is that part of the reason why America has such a low fertility rate? I mean, actually, all Western countries have very low fertility rates right now.
Yeah, it's absolutely one of the factors. So Marshall McLuhan, who was a Canadian philosopher who was writing and publishing in the 20th century, he published a book called The Extensions of Media, where he coined the term that the medium is the message. And so what this means is that you can't judge a given technology simply by what it technically does, but by the social and psychic consequences that it bears upon society. So your cell phone, for example, doesn't simply make phone calls and connect you to other people. But the introduction of the cell phone or even the smartphone has actually radically reshaped the way that we think about communication, time, the boundaries between work, dating other people, this entire conversation that we've had. And so we have to look at technology, not simply by what it does, but how it's changing the way that we see the world, our culture, and the way we interact. And so I think when it comes to the connection between this and the birth rate, this is a really important factor where so many of the technologies that we've adopted have really reshaped the way that we approach things like dating, where we rely on online dating apps and swiping left, swiping right in such a way that, well, I know many people who have successfully gotten married from someone they've met on these apps. They're not all bad. At the same time, the apps are training us to think about other people by these 3-second snap judgments, where you're looking simply at very basic things like their height or their looks, and then making a decision about whether you'll ever give them a chance on the dating market. And it also fuels women in particular to always believe like there's someone better out there for them. So women get way more attention than men get on these apps. And so then they think, well, I really am hot stuff. I really should keep my options open for even longer because there's an even greater guy out there for me. And so instead of thinking about who is a man that I can meet and fall in love with good character and build a family with, they're thinking, who is the best option I should be waiting for? And ultimately, if that's carried on for too long, can be very detrimental to our dating and to our marriage rates. And then you have things like work. Your work email follows you everywhere. And so there have been reports done showing that where people would get off work and they would leave the building, leave their work behind, they go to bars, they go to dinner, they go see friends, and they were fully present, engaging, yep, and flirting and going on dates. And now you leave work and work comes with you on your phone. And then you're at dinner and you get a work email and you're like, oh, shoot, let me just respond to this really quickly. Or let me text my boss so he knows this. And it's just this natural impulse. But how much is that actually affecting our ability to connect with other people or the time that we think we have to have kids? Because if you feel like you're always on, always expected to perform as these digital technologies sort of convey, even unintentionally, then how is that affecting even our willingness to get married and have more kids? And so I think all of those technological factors have absolutely shaped our culture. And it's not surprising to me that sort of congruent with that, and for many other causes and reasons, right? Affordability is a massive issue, decline in religiosity, all of these factors have sort of all worked together to our detriment, such that we're now having fewer children than ever before. So as of 2024, we Americans were on average having 1.6 children per woman, which is far below the 2.1 replacement rate. And that, of course, doesn't mean that every woman will always have kids or that they should have kids, but it means that we are having way fewer children than ever before. And beyond the sort of economic national security concerns that come with that, there's a much deeper question about what is the emotional and the spiritual state of men and women that they would no longer be interested in getting married, forming those lifelong bonds of having children and giving of themselves fully, self-sacrificially. As women, we give our body and blood to bring life into the world. And yet in that dying to self, we are renewed and resurrected to this far greater life and far greater beauty of relationship and depth of experience than we could have ever imagined. And yet fewer and fewer women in particular are even interested in that today. It's emotionally and spiritually speaking, it seems like a very dark place to be as a society.
Well, and for women, there's a very real kind of, we have a biological clock. There's a window in which we're able to conceive and carry healthy children. And that's just a fact. And I think so if you delay and delay, like you're talking about, delay, oh, well, wait till I'm finished with my PhD, wait till I'm more financially stable, wait to find the right person. And then suddenly here you are in your late 30s, early 40s, and now you want children, but there's a problem with fertility. It's harder to have them. You have to go through IVF or learn that you cannot have children, that window has passed. And so that leads into another topic that you discuss a lot, which is surrogacy, IVF. And this is, again, technology and humans. And I'm reminded of the movie Jurassic Park, the book written by Michael Crichton, where one of the characters infamously says, we're so busy asking ourselves, can we do something? We're not stopping to consider, should we do this? And I feel that's where we are. We can do these things. We can IVF. And now it's not just IVF and random. It's let's pick the embryo that we want. Let's pick the eye color. Let's pick the biological sex. Let's tall, short. Let's make these custom designer babies. And if we don't want to carry them, well, we'll just get a surrogate and implant into another woman. And so now even we're going to pick, let's pick a more optimal egg donor, because we want to optimize and we want to have just this perfect child. This to me is insanity, like 1984 and a Brave New World all mixed in one.
Yeah, this is exactly right. And again, this goes back to the thesis that we cannot just look at technology by what it does, but how it changes the way we think about children in this example of reproductive technology. So think about IVF. It was originally developed for two specific reasons. One, for women who lost the ability to use their eggs due to cancer treatments and chemotherapy. And second, for women who had blocked fallopian tubes, which back in the 1970s and 80s meant that they didn't have a way of addressing that. So it just meant that you weren't able to conceive a child. So IVF was created as a workaround for those two very rare but heartbreaking scenarios. And of course, how is it really transformed today? Well, now IVF isn't even just for infertility. It's for optimizing the children that you have when you want to have them. And so now the entire fertility industry isn't oriented towards a last stop if nothing else is working, if you have this severe infertility issue. But now multiple states have actually redefined infertility to include things like your relationship status or your social status, meaning that if I was a single woman and simply didn't have a man, they would say, well, no, you're infertile because you don't have the relationship necessary to have a child, or take a same-sex couple who, no matter how many times they try, two men are not going to conceive a child. And they say, no, now you're actually infertile and we can use IVF to help you have a baby. So it's this idea that the industry has now gone far, far, far from its roots and helping overcome these rare cases of infertility, and is now oriented toward helping anyone for any reason have a certain kind of baby that fulfills their dreams of parenthood. It's not about treating infertility. It's not about what's best for the child. It's about what the parents want from the relationship. And so I think this is a very important two-step where you have these cases of legitimate infertility struggles and parents who deeply desire a child. Mm-hmm. And when they're going through that experience, they're oftentimes being moved along to the IVF process before they've adequately been diagnosed and treated, because we'll say, well, infertility is a disease, therefore IVF is the solution. But in reality, infertility is not a standalone disease. You don't get infertility like you get appendicitis or a tumor in cancer. Infertility is the symptom of underlying reproductive health conditions. And so when one is struggling with infertility, it's actually a sign that you and your partner's bodies are not healthy or not functioning as they ought to have kids. And so studies have found, I know these are a lot of studies, but they're so interesting for thinking about this, that when a couple is diagnosed with infertility, there are typically 4 or more underlying conditions that are shared equally between the man and woman. So it's not just a woman's problem when you have infertility, it's 50% of the time due to male factor causes. And yet there's this wild study that came out of the United Kingdom that showed that OBGYNs who were initially working on infertility cases, right, who were trained on women's reproductive systems, couldn't actually identify the core part of a male's reproductive system, largely causing infertility in many cases. So then they're saying, well, we've tried our best. We don't know what's going on. I think you should just go to IVF. And so when assisted reproductive technologies are used, up to 30% of those cases are diagnosed with unexplained infertility, which is just a way of saying, we don't know what's going on, but let's just give you IVF in hopes that you can have a baby. So it's just a matter of like, good men and women's health, of like technological advancements. I'm really curious in asking the question of how can we actually use all of the technological innovation that we have to actually identify, diagnose, and treat those underlying conditions. I mean, blocked fallopian tubes used to be a hard stop. You can't have babies. Now we have surgeries that can restore blocked fallopian tubes, enabling natural conception. It's absolutely incredible. But it's so easy to rely on something that seems like the fast and easy solution rather than doing the deep work of really optimizing our health. And then even beyond those cases of infertility, yes, you're absolutely right. We now find ourselves in places where IVF is pushed as an option. You have major corporations who are saying, women, part of your fertility benefit is we'll pay for you to freeze your eggs. We'll pay for you to do IVF. And what does that encourage, implicitly or explicitly? Delay your fertility, delay marriage, and pursue your career. And then you're absolutely right, where then women find themselves in their late 30s and 40s starting to have children and finding out that even with IVF, they have less than a 10% success rate age 40 onwards. And beyond that, I know many women in DC who have shared this with me where they say, you know, Emma, I waited to have kids until I was 38 or 40 because I was pursuing my career. But statistically speaking, women actually don't reach their greatest career success until their 40s and 50s, which means all of a sudden, if they are able to have kids, they're now in a position where at age 40, they're welcoming their first child into the world, this great, miraculous, incredible experience. And they're being offered the greatest job promotions they've worked decades for. And they'll look at me with tears in their eyes and say, Emma, it's the worst position to be in because I want nothing more than to be home with my 6-week-old daughter. But if I turn down this job promotion, I will be giving up everything that I have worked for. And it feels like this lose-lose situation where the two things that you desire are now conflicting with each other in ways that no woman wants to find themselves in that position. So this is where in my book, Lead Like JL, I really dive into these questions because I want to empower women to really be in the driver's seat and be strategic in how they think about work, marriage, and children. So I interviewed Tiffany Justice, who is with Moms for Liberty. I interviewed Representative Mary Miller and a host of these other women who took a seasonal approach to life. And in many cases, their 20s and early 30s were devoted to having babies and brainstorming and really developing the passions and gifts that they have. And then as their children got older and were established in school, the Lord just starts opening these incredible opportunities for them, where now Mary Miller finds herself as a leading pro-life advocate in Congress. Tiffany Justice is one of the vice presidents at the Heritage Foundation, helping build some of the greatest parental rights movements. And it wasn't that they had to choose between family or career, but that they were wise and strategic and prioritizing first things first, and then trusting God with the rest. And God is the most generous, most abundant-minded being there ever is or ever will be. And so if anything, we should really be leaning into, again, that prioritization of first things first, prioritizing marriage and family, and then continuing to brainstorm and develop those skills and trust that when the time comes, we'll be able to step into even cooler opportunities than we probably ever could have imagined for ourselves.
Well, that's my story as well. I had kids young. I had finished my master's degree, but had children relatively young and stay-at-home mom, 5 kids. And now I'm pursuing a career that I didn't think was possible. I thought, well, because I had a degree in political science, I wanted to work in DC. And I thought, well, I got pregnant and focused on that, and I couldn't go back to work or go back to law school. I wanted to be with my son, 4 more girls afterwards, and that was my season, and I was stay-at-home mom, minivan, but I always remained interested in causes and things I believed in. And now with my youngest about to go into high school, there was an opportunity, and my husband is able to work less because he had to work really hard in the beginning. Like, he had to put in the hours. And so it was a really great time for me to go into the workforce, and where my husband could take on some of my responsibilities, and the kids were old enough to help out around the house and make everything work. And I think that's a good message to send, that if you have young enough to pursue a lot of your career goals, and you were able to raise a family, and they're your support system too. They're cheering you on. So I do think that that's a message that needs to be told more.
Yeah, absolutely. And even speaking to the skills and the disciplines that you develop, like if you are being fully present and faithful in the responsibilities you have to your family, to your children, to home management, you are actually developing so many essential disciplines that are going to play out in ways far beyond the actual application of the home. It's training you to be strategic with your time say, Emma, I waited to have kids until I was 38 or 40 because I was pursuing my career. But statistically speaking, women actually don't reach their greatest career success until their 40s and 50s, which means all of a sudden, if they are able to have kids, they're now in a position where at age 40, they're welcoming their first child into the world, this great, miraculous, incredible experience, and they're being offered the greatest job promotions they've worked decades for. And they'll look at me with tears in their eyes and say, Emma, it's the worst position to be in because I want nothing more than to be home with my 6-week-old daughter. But if I turn down this job promotion, I will be giving up everything that I have worked for. And it feels like this lose-lose situation where the two things that you desire are now conflicting with each other in ways that no woman wants to find themselves in that position. So this is where in my book, Lead Like JL, I really dive into these questions because I want to empower women to really be in the driver's seat and be strategic in how they think about work, marriage, and children. So I interviewed Tiffany Justice, who is with Moms for Liberty. I interviewed Representative Mary Miller and a host of these other women who took a seasonal approach to life. And in many cases, their 20s and early 30s were devoted to having babies and brainstorming and really developing the passions and gifts that they have. And then as their children got older and were established in school, the Lord just starts opening these incredible opportunities for them, where now Mary Miller finds herself as a leading pro-life advocate in Congress. Tiffany Justice is one of the vice presidents at the Heritage Foundation, helping build some of the greatest parental rights movements. And it wasn't that they had to choose between family or career, but that they were wise and strategic and prioritizing first things first, and then trusting God with the rest. And God is the most generous, most abundant-minded being there ever is or ever will be. And so if anything, we should really be leaning into, again, that prioritization of first things first, prioritizing marriage and family, and then continuing to brainstorm and develop those skills, and trust that when the time comes, we'll be able to step into even cooler opportunities than we probably ever could have imagined for ourselves.
Well, that's my story as well. I had kids young. I had finished my master's degree, but had children relatively young and stay-at-home mom, 5 kids. And now I'm pursuing a career that I didn't think was possible. I thought, well, because I had a degree in political science, I wanted to work in DC. And I thought, well, I got pregnant and focused on that. And I couldn't go back to work or go back to law school. I wanted to be with my son, 4 more girls afterwards. And that was my season. And I was stay-at-home mom, minivan, but I always remained interested in causes and things I believed in. And now with my youngest about to go into high school, there was an opportunity. And my husband is able to work less because he had to work really hard in the beginning. Like he had to put in the hours. And so it was a really great time for me to go into the workforce, and where my husband could take on some of my responsibilities, and the kids were old enough to help out around the house and make everything work. And I think that's a good message to send, that if you have your kids younger, it's not the end of the world. You have a second act because you're still young enough to pursue a lot of your career goals, and you were able to raise a family, and they're your support system too. They're cheering you on. So I do think that that's a message that needs to be told more.
Yeah, absolutely. And even speaking to the skills and the disciplines that you develop, like if you are being fully present and faithful in the responsibilities you have to your family, to your children, to home management, you are actually developing so many essential disciplines that are going to play out in ways far beyond the actual application of the home. It's training you to be strategic with your time, to make the most of the opportunities you're given. I've heard this from many women, and it's been absolutely true in my life. The moment you have kids, you become 10 times more efficient than ever before. And so if you're working 3 hours in the morning before your kids wake up, like I will do, so that I have more time with them when they actually wake up in the morning, all all of a sudden you're like, I have 3 hours. I'm either going to get this research done, turn this article in, finish what I have to get done, or that's it. Like I lose then the next few hours. And so all of a sudden your output increases. It's just kind of amazing, like how being faithful and fully present actually then equips you with the skills that you need to succeed in all of these other areas of life. And really this plays out in a number of ways too, where like your greatest expression of leadership is in your ability to discipline your own body and to run a household and raise children well. And if you can master those skills, then you are unstoppable in the rest of the world, which is just a broader, bigger application of those first principles that you learn within the home.
Yeah, and one of the blessings of technology, the good, is that women can work part-time and still they can be moms and have their careers. And I love the example that we see in the Trump administration, where you have young moms like Carolyn Levitt, where they're bringing their babies into the White House. They have husbands that can stay home and help, or they can work part-time and they can help while young mom is at work. And there's a work-life balance. So if you are committed to your education, you really believe in it, but you also have prioritized the fact that I want to be a mom and I want to have my kids when I can enjoy them and chase them and run around and have grandkids when I'm still young enough to enjoy them too, that I'm going to work very hard to balance both. And so I'm going to find the right partner. I'm going to find the right employer. I'm going to go into the right profession. And if you can do all of those things and be thoughtful about it, you can do this sort of delicate balance. And I think there is no better time for women to strike that balance than now, where they don't have to fully stay at home at first. And maybe at some point they decide they want to for a season and then they go back. Or they can try and balance if they have the right employer and the right partner and they're in a certain skill.
Oh, yeah, this is absolutely right. And this is where I think one of the biggest blessings coming out of COVID is the normalcy of work from home, flexibility, and remote work. This is my entire life right now, which is remote. And with the way that technology, through these sort of Zoom meetings, the easy access of email and shared documents and so on, I'm able to still be very effective in my work, doing so sometimes even outside of normal work hours to be very strategic around my girl's schedule. But you're absolutely right. I have an employer. Who exactly like this. I have
work until that once 2:30 rolls around and I'm done. I'm not now picking up and carpooling and all that.
Yes, no, exactly. So I have an employer who's fully supportive of moms and wants mothers to thrive in the role that they have. Technology connects us even from hours apart from the rest of our colleagues. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Having husbands and families that are really devoted in an all hands on deck way of figuring out how we can put our families first, have a productive home economy, that our work flows from that, instead of this sort of outdated model of we're going to be in the office 40 to 60 hours a week. That's our number one priority, career success, break the glass ceiling, and yet sacrifice maybe some of those really meaningful connections with our children and time with our children that you just never get back once you look back on your life. So I think you're absolutely right. Technology is and shifting norms around these things have been such a blessing for moms to be able to craft work and family in very creative ways that actually align with their long-term goals, rather than feeling like they're constantly being pitted against each other.
And particularly conservative, family-oriented organizations. I know our Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, they're hiring a lot more moms, and they are so flexible. They understand that to attract young conservative moms, women, they already are moms or they want to be moms, and so they create a workspace that is just beneficial for all and reinforces the values that we carry, that we value motherhood and fatherhood, and that we want to practice what we preach. And that means with our employees, to get the best employees, we're going to be flexible.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that's maybe one of the big takeaways, even from our conversation today, which is that we can prioritize. I think like that's actually going back to career and education. One of the things that I am a huge advocate of is to implement something I like to call family life planning into our career conversations. And this is something that I am very grateful multiple professors did with me when I was in college, which was they didn't just ask me about my career goals and interests, but they started off asking the far more important questions, which was, do you want to get married one day? Are you dating anyone? What do you think about having kids? And they were really great at working with me to think, okay, if you really want to get married younger, I was, dating my now husband at the time, so that was actively on the radar. We knew that we wanted to have kids. One of the things they talked about was how you could be intentional in crafting a career and choosing a career that can scale up and scale down with you depending on your season of life. I already really liked research and writing and communication. And so there's a lot of different ways that can play out. But it turns out that being a policy analyst at a think tank, given how supportive my organization is actually a really fantastic way where I know so many women in DC who are listed alongside all their colleagues at an organization doing good work, but maybe in a given season, they're only actually working 10 hours a week and they're just on a stipend. And so they're still able to have that institutional affiliation. They're still able to do work within that time, but they can still primarily be present with their children and still maintain the sort of public prominence where they don't feel like I've just given everything up and completely forgotten about in the world. And even if you do that, that's totally fine. It's actually way easier to re-enter the workforce and in certain careers than ever before. And so having those very honest conversations about, okay, how do you intentionally, strategically craft your life so that you can scale up and scale down as you want, that you have the flexibility. I think that's the thing that study after study show is that men want stability and women want flexibility so that they can navigate all the demands of home and of children and of different seasons of life in a way that actually works best for them. And those are the conversations that I hope more and more women are having, because the reality is that women have more educational and career opportunities than ever before. Mm-hmm. And they are a competitive bargaining chip in basically every institution they're a part of. And so instead of just treating that as like a sort of form of servitude of I'm going to do everything I have to do in order to look just like my male colleagues and my career profession and advancement, what if we actually took all of those opportunities, took all of the competitive bargaining power we bring to the table, and then say, no, I am both an excellent person to work with you, and here are the things that are actually best for me that I'm going to bargain for, which is flexibility. It's ability to work more or fewer hours depending on your season. It's all of these factors taken together. And I think that's where, if we can empower a generation of women to really strategically take hold of that, I think you're going to see so much restoration of the way that we view marriage and of children, where it's not work pitted against those things, but actually properly ordering those in our life in a given season, and really empowering women in that pursuit. That's one of my greatest hopes for my generation, and even for conversations like these, that's the direction we can push people toward. And that's what Lead Like JL covers. It's why I wanted to write this book, to sort of dive into a lot of these questions and stories that I wrestled with coming out of college and entering the workforce. And I'm so grateful for so many mentors who spoke into my life, but also realizing that so many younger women don't have mentors who were having those conversations with them, and wanting to be sure that we had access to that conversation today.
Yes, and in closing, that's so important, that because we see what's happening with the majority of well-educated women in America. And I think that for too long, there weren't the icons, the mentors for conservative girls to look up to. That's changed. We have young women like Riley Gaines and Paula Scanlon and so many, Chloe Cole. But we need more women, more conservative, family-oriented women who are strong and smart and they have careers, being vocal about who they are, what they believe, and being an example for my girls and your girls to look up to. Because otherwise, all they have are these she boss women that they say things that this is what's going to make you happy, and they're being sold this story. And I think that the regret and the nihilism that results when they find out that everything they've been told is a lie is something that we're dealing with pretty severely in America right now. So I think your book, if you just to talk a little bit more about it and when it's going to be released before we go, because I think it's really needed right now, particularly as we see the havoc that's just that we see among young girls. It's really sad and concerning.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think most women, and certainly most conservative leaning women, don't identify with the narrow model of girl boss feminism, or on the other hand, the narrow model of the Tradwife movement. And they're looking,
yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you and me, right? They're looking for something in between that.
I don't bake homemade bread all day long. No, I can't do that.
Exactly. But they're looking for this vision of what does a strong and smart and dedicated woman look like, who also honors her family and the good of her community first. How do we actually take those passions and gifts and desires for work and orient that with these natural desires for family and for children in a way that allows the two to actually flourish? And so that's the basis. That's where I start in my book, is wrestling with where we are as a culture. Among Gen Z, it's actually no longer cool to be a girl boss. It's kind of cringe. And people are sort of over the whole like pantsuit model. But at the same time, we're now swinging so far the other direction, where soft quitting and ghosting and not caring too much about anything has become the norm. And of course, that's not good either. That sort of loss of meaning and of doing things important with your life is also deeply problematic. And so instead, Lead Like JL is sort of reorienting the conversation back to this healthy medium. And instead of just looking at stories of women today, though I certainly look at many stories of women today, we actually start all the way back in the beginning and dive into the depth of scripture, looking at all of these incredible women like Jael, who the book is named after, who rather infamously took a tent peg and a wooden mallet and drove it through the skull of Israel's enemy. The great takeaway being not that we promote violence, because that's not at all the lesson we're giving women today, but that Jael was equipped to fight the enemy when he came to her doorstep, only because she had been faithful to her daily duties and responsibilities. And for women in that time, setting up and taking down tents was a feminine domestic duty. She would have done it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And because she was present in her home, engaged in what was happening politically, when this enemy general comes stumbling to her, she knew exactly what to do, and she had the strength to do it. And I think that's the lesson that we want to translate to women today, that the greatest opportunities, these leadership skills that we want to see, start in and from the home, especially if you are a wife and you are a mother. And it's faithfulness to that equips you for everything else that the Lord has for you. Yeah. But we go through 7 principles and all of these key women who really shed a light, I think, on a far more nuanced conversation around biblical femininity. It's not just like the New Testament applications. It's looking at some of these nitty-gritty stories in the Old Testament and saying, okay, what do we learn from these women in the Bible who have lived these incredible lives, and how can we apply that to our life today?
Yes, and these are incredibly strong women, very strong women. This isn't, they're not for the faint of heart, and but they are good women, and they're faithful women. And so you're not weak if you prioritize family. That's not weakness, that's strength. But we can balance. And I love that message, and I look forward to reading your book.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on today. This was such a fun conversation.
This was a fun conversation and a needed one, especially between us. We have 6 daughters, and so it's a conversation that has to be had. We have to be real about what's happening and address it head on. We can't pretend, and we have to be good role models and encourage more role modeling for our daughters. So thank you so much for coming on. This was a great conversation.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Emma Waters, thank you so much for joining us today. This is one of those conversations that reaches beyond policy because it gets to the heart of who we are, what we value, and whether America still believes in family, children, and the future. We appreciate your voice, your work, and the clarity you bring to such an important conversation. In particular, it was great to talk about what it means to be a woman right now, especially as a conservative woman, and how we can be a better example for the future, for future generations, for our daughters, and how we can strike that really delicate and important balance between work, home life, children, everything. We want to be great wives, we want to be great mothers, we want to have, really interesting careers. But sometimes for everything, there is a season, and some things go to the forefront and some things have to go to the back burner for a little while. But that doesn't make you less of a woman, less of a mother. It just means that you are wise because you are balancing. And the more that we can support women and encourage them to think about that work family life balance as soon as possible so that they make really good choices and they have no regrets in their life. I know I don't have regrets in my life, and I had kids young, and now I'm in this next stage of life where I'm able to have more of a career and work with an organization that allows me to balance. And that's really important. The fight for the future of our country is not able to be separated from the family. The fight for the family and the fight for our country are one and the same. We recognize this in Moms for Liberty, and I'm so happy that you're watching and that you recognize it as well. Our conversation on AI and AI in education could not be more timely. Right now, it is the topic that is front of mind for parents because we are seeing all of this research come out. And frankly, the research just confirms common sense that children need to spend less time in front of screens and more time reading books, that they need to spend more time with their parents and their extended family and their friends. They need more human interaction, not chat AI bots. That's not good for little kids. We need to come up with a system that works. And that's why Moms for Liberty is proud to announce that we have a breakthrough AI toolkit. This is just revolutionary. We are one of the first organizations to really be talking about AI and providing parents some tools that they can use so that they can be effective. As I close the show, you're going to see a message from our CEO, Tina Deskovich, and she's going to talk more about AI in education and the AI toolkit that Moms for Liberty has to offer you. So please stay tuned, watch this message, and go to momsforliberty.org. That's moms, F-O-R, liberty.org to learn more. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to talking to you soon. If you like this show, please like and subscribe to the Moms for Liberty YouTube channel. That's at moms4liberty. That's our tag. So if you like it, please like and subscribe. Thanks.
Parents, you must always hold the keys to the AI toolbox. AI is already in classrooms across the country. Millions of teachers are using AI in various ways. They use it to grade papers and to streamline their workload. They use it to create individual learning plans for students. And students are already using AI too. They're using it for research in the classroom, and some are using it to create new technology and use it in innovative ways to advance their learning. It's really exciting to see what's happening. Truly, there's also a downside to having AI in the classroom without any guardrails. We hear stories in the news already across the country, and parents are testifying that this is happening.
Parents who say character AI is also pushing dangerous content to kids, and at times acting like a digital predator.
These companies knew exactly what they were doing. They designed chatbots to blur the lines between human and machine.
1 in 5 high school students reported that they or someone they know has had a romantic relationship with AI.
Researchers found the bear openly discussed sexually explicit and dangerous content with kids.
The other problem that we're seeing with AI is it's not always true.
Sometimes AI can tell you what you want to hear, not necessarily what is true.
It's not helpful when students just use it to directly cheat.
Parents have to understand the algorithms that are basically set up to direct our children to look at certain things, feel certain things, and believe certain things. That's the role of a parent, not an algorithm.
We are living in a moment of wonder, and it is our responsibility to prepare children in America.
Moms for Liberty is leading the charge on unifying, educating, and empowering parents to understand AI and how it's impacting our children. We're already doing this by joining the AI and Education Task Force under the leadership of First Lady Melania Trump. I've personally attended 2 meetings at the White House on this. I've spoken to members of the cabinet about the guardrails that need to be put in place to protect our children. Because we understand the importance of empowering you to protect all children, we've created model policy that you can download and take directly to your school board and ask them to adopt. We've created school board speeches that you can change and modify for yourself and use to speak to your school board in a public forum. We've created draft policy for the state level that you can go meet with your state legislators and ask them to sponsor the bill and start moving it through the process so that all the children in your state will be protected.